My generation especially, we really want to connect. We are just too scared to say so. I think we're all very lonely and I think trapped in our screens, and everybody's sick of it, but I don't think anybody has really been expressing it. And so giving people an opportunity to connect, especially in the types of shows that we've been playing, I love being in spaces where it's not just musicians, but all sorts of artists, and we learn from each other. And it's a really great community. I really want everyone to make a new friend at my show. Like, that's always my goal, especially if you're in an intimate space. That's very feasible.
You know that feeling when something has always been inside you, but it takes a journey, sometimes across an ocean, to finally let it out? My guest today, Michael Isaak, grew up in Los Angeles in an Egyptian household, surrounded by the sounds of Kulthum and Fairuz, singing Coptic hymns in church, and eventually teaching himself production on YouTube and using FL Studio. By his late teens, he was making indie folk music with Phoebe Bridgers and Sufjan Stevens as his North Stars. And it was good, but something was missing. It wasn't until his first trip to Egypt at 19 that the real journey began. He came home with an oud, a stringed instrument, a renewed sense of cultural identity, and eventually a place at Columbia University, where he dove deep into Arabic music theory, history, and language. What emerged from all of this is something genuinely new, a sound he calls Arabesque folk. His debut album, The Carpet Maker, drops May 15th, and the lead single, Hold Your Keys, a meditation on diaspora, exile, and the hope of return, is out now. This is one of those conversations I keep thinking about. We talk about what it means to stop trying to sound different and start sounding like yourself, and how the music that shaped your earliest years lives in your body before it ever lives in your songs. And about why sometimes the longest path to your art is the most direct one. I'm Becky Boyland, and this is Second Verse. Welcome, Michael. Thank you for being on Second Verse today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so pumped to be here.
I have loved reading your story and getting to know you a little bit. And I always ask, though, what made you fall in love with music from the very beginning?
That's such a good question. I really don't think there was one moment that made me fall in love with music. I think it's always been a constant presence in my life, like since I was a little kid, singing in church, singing church hymns in the community. I've always been surrounded by music. And even though my family, I don't come from a very musical background, I come from a big family of music appreciators. And so I think my parents and grandparents introduced me to some amazing music growing up that I still listen to this day. And I think maybe that's it. Maybe just having it always be around is what made me fall in love with it.
I love how you qualify that as music appreciators, because I also don't really have much of a musical family, but we always had great music playing. And so that definitely had an impact on my taste in music too. And so then you got very quickly into music, though, as a performer going into high school, right?
Yeah, I mean, I always did it as a hobby. It was always something that I did for fun. I would always play my grandparents' piano, and I started learning how to play the ukulele in middle school. Going into high school, I learned singing a little bit more professionally, and I joined the school choir. And that kind of gave me a really good foundation, I think, in music, especially the not the theory, but the technique for singing, things that I don't necessarily think about today that I think still contributed to my singing and my writing, and just being around great music. Like I said before, learning how to play choral music and sing choral music, I think was really important for me. And I also at that time started getting into producing music, learning how to do digital production using FL Studio at the time. And I had a couple friends who were making music, and so I started producing for them towards the end of high school. And then I started writing my own music and producing it myself as well. That was when I was about 19.
That's awesome. And I love the deep cut of FL Studio. I am familiar, but I think a lot of people don't hear that phrase very often. And of course, its original incarnation as Fruity Loops. But yeah, really cool, interesting kind of niche job, but what a great way to get started into production.
Totally. I think it's so interesting because I used to watch like FL Studio beat making videos on YouTube, and a couple of my cousins were into it as well. And so we would just kind of make beats. And that was my start in music production, which was really cool. And now it feels supernatural to me. I've been doing it now for, I mean, that was when I was 14, 15. So, 8 years almost that I've been doing it. So yeah, I think it's a great way to start. It's like a game too. It feels like a really fun way to get started.
Absolutely. And just experimenting has so much value. And it starts to not only reflect the tastes of the music that we've grown up with and started to develop, but it shapes and forms our taste. So I think that's a really cool thing that I think if people are too nervous and a little bit scared to get into, that's a perfect reason not to be scared. You can't break it. Just try it. Just try something new.
Totally, totally.
So then you went off to college, and even though so often the story with my guest pivots here, you actually dove right into music.
I went to college for a year and it really wasn't the right fit for me. So I ended up actually taking time off of school, moving back home to Los Angeles and pursuing music full time. And yeah, because I never really wanted to study music in that way. Just because I was very interested in pop and folk music and alternative music, it never felt like something that I wanted to do to study Western classical music, especially because all of the classical music that I had been exposed to had been Arabic classical music. So I started as a freshman, didn't declare a path of study, and it just was not a good fit. And when I started, making more music, writing more songs, I realized that it was about the time to, pursue that full time. I'd done stuff for other people. I've been doing music as a hobby, but I'd never seen it as something I could really do up until that point. And I think I just had to take that leap and take time off. And I'm so beyond thankful for that time that I took. I think it gave me this opportunity to grow as a musician and start putting out music, but also really mature as a person. And those 2 years that I took off of school were really, really essential for my development.
That's awesome. And how did that define or inform the kinds of music that you maybe started doing and what you pivoted into?
Great. Yeah. So, I mean, at that time, I was very into alternative music, alternative folk music, indie pop. I had a lot of influences from the American side, Phoebe Bridgers, Sufjan Stevens, and I really wanted to make that type of like indie alternative sound. And I think it worked for me for a while. I really liked it, and I was playing shows and doing that and meeting a lot of really cool people who were making a similar type of music. And it was very fun. I think that period too was great for me first starting to develop my identity as a musician. And then I realized I have this very, not your run of the mill musical background from my childhood, hearing, this mix of Orthodox church hymns and then also this repertoire of classical Arabic music, as well as Arabic pop and alternative sounds from the Arab world as well. And I really wanted to do something with that. And it never really clicked when I first started doing it, because I think at the beginning, I had this obsession with like really wanting to sound different and really wanting to have this thing to distinguish myself from other artists and what they were making. And so it never really fit quite right when I tried to do it at first. And it took a lot of immersion. I think I really was starting to be very keen on wanting to make this sound happen after I went to Egypt for the first time. And that was like its own spiritual experience in itself, because it's, my motherland. I'd never been there before all my life. And so going there when I was 19 was this eye-opening experience, and it triggered this curiosity about my history, about my family history, about music and culture and arts, and wanting to just immerse myself in all of it. And so After a couple trips to Egypt, I was kind of like, I had got my oud for the first time and I started trying to play it, not very successfully. And after that, this opportunity came for me to transfer to Colombia. And I took it up. And while I've been here, this was in 2024. So this was like after my 2 years of doing, alternative indie folk music in Los Angeles. I moved to New York in 2024 and started really more so immersing myself in the Arab music scene here in New York, which is much bigger than the one in LA. I mean, there's barely anyone doing that in LA. So I went to these Arabic music classes here. I joined the Arab music ensemble at Columbia. And then I study history at Columbia, and I study specifically musical and cultural history of the Arab world and of the Middle East. And I think having that understanding of the historical context made making the music much more important, and I felt more of a responsibility to make that music.
And I wonder if, especially in that initial sort of feeling of wanting to make that sound be part of your sound, if it was more the aspirational that just needed that immersion and that experience to actually make it internal.
Totally. I think it always was internal, and I just needed something to tap back into it. I compare it to the experience. Also, when I started at Columbia, I started taking Arabic classes for heritage speakers. And I was like, I'm not good at Arabic at all. I don't know this language. I maybe can understand a little bit. But I honestly surprised myself with how much I actually knew. And the more I studied it, the more things would come back to me, like from my early childhood. And so the same thing happened when I started learning the music and learning how to play the oud from professionals. And all of this kind of music that felt like was fundamental in my childhood started coming back to me. And the more that I would listen to it, the more that I would kind of start to see it make its way into my writing without me having to force it. And I think once I reached that moment, I was like, okay, we have something here. We can do something really cool with this. And I couldn't have done it too without like jamming with people, meeting other artists in the city. My good friend Sohail, who played the oud on my record, we would jam all these songs out, and I would kind of come up with these interesting ways to build this bridge between Western music and Arabic music. And I'd be like, okay, like this might sound a little bit crazy, but I want you to play this, and I'm going to play this, and we're going to make it work. And it was a lot of trial and error experiences like that. And a sound like this does take a lot of experimentation before you get to a complete album.
That's really just so exciting and so fascinating. And it makes me think about how I've played guitar for many, many years and played primarily live. And so when I started to produce in the studio, I had almost a different perfectionism about it. And so trying to do it in the studio, I actually kind of ran away from it for a little while and thought, I'll just do things that I can do perfectly, whatever that is in the studio. And once I came back around and stopped taking it so overly seriously, then it was a whole different ballgame, and it became the thing it had always been for me, which was really, really great. For our listeners, if you are not familiar with the oud, definitely check it out and just Google it. And I think it's a sound you probably have heard but not been aware of. But for our listeners, could you also just explain a little bit about it?
Great. Yeah. So the oud is an 11-string classical Arabic instrument that's often called the ancestor to the guitar. It was created somewhere in Middle Ages Iraq, but brought to Spain. And kind of the technique and the schooling for Arabic music and for this instrument was all pretty much developed in Spain, Andalusia, under the Islamic rule of that time. And you find some amazing pieces from that period as well. And in my ensemble, we learn a lot of these pieces and we perform them. And so getting to play those on the oud, I mean, I was also like fully, not very aware of these types of compositions when I was doing my initial immersion. These are things that maybe even go above my parents' head, and that they're like the classics of the class. Like think of like the Bach and the Beethoven of Arabic music. And so, I would just keep going deeper and deeper into this rabbit hole. And now I'm at the point where like I really want as much as I I can get. Like, also I'm from Egypt, but learning more about like my neighbors' music and different nuances between different regions of Egypt or different, traditions. There's really so much that you can absorb from all of that.
That's so fascinating. And it's really a great way to look at, obviously, beyond culture and heritage to, say that term neighbor, because we do borrow so much in the arts, in music, in so many different other artistic realms. And I think that's just such a beautiful thing. And so there are so many times when we don't have familiarity if we're primarily immersed in a particular style. And it's just so empowering and entertaining and enlightening to get to check out different things, even if we don't have some strong connection to it in our history and our background. But like my mind just kind of melts at 11 strings and how that works out, because I'm used to stringed instruments that have multiple courses. But even just thinking about, wow, how would you play that? And my classical experience is brass, so that's one note. I don't have to deal with all the other things that I have to deal with when I'm playing pop guitar. And so it's just so fascinating. And when you have that many centuries that an instrument has been used in so many different ways and so many different styles, there just has to be, mind-bending levels of information and ways to approach it and how to grow your skill and then to apply it in a folk or pop kind of context. So that's really amazing. How did you find that process of trying to make this fit into what you're doing, and how much of a connection with some of the indie folk that you've done in the past has persisted through your style?
Great question. I think took a break from writing on the guitar for a while in the time that I was writing this current album. Not like intentionally, but I think I definitely in this period of immersion, like I was maybe messing around with guitar, but I wasn't really writing a lot. I was really just playing the oud and learning how to play the oud for a good 6 to 8 months. I've been playing since January of last year. I mean, seriously, since January of last year. And so when it came to like writing the songs for this album, I started writing after this period of immersion. And then I started to see these motifs of Arabic music slowly like seep their way in to the songs that I was writing, the specific melodies or the specific, vocal style that I was using. Or, I mean, Arabic music is mostly aharmonic. There aren't chords in it. But the kinds of ways that I was maybe singing an Arabic melody on top of a Western chord progression. And then once I kind of saw those things that were emerging, I really tried to like lean into them. And so part of that was also the jam sessions that I was talking about earlier. And going to these jam sessions and being like, I don't know like what exactly is going to come out of this, but I'm going to make like whatever feels right and whatever feels important to me. I'm going to stop thinking about, oh, I really want this song to sound Arabic, or like I want this song to sound different. I think when I was too obsessive of those things, it really felt forced. It felt like I was trying to put apples and oranges together, when in reality, like it doesn't have to be putting two things together. It can be, just a reflection of my identity as an Egyptian who's, born and raised in the West, and what kind of music comes from that mindset and that upbringing and that background with those particular influences. And so once I stopped obsessing over like, okay, what is this going to sound like? I kind of like let everything happen, kind of let everything fall into place. And then there were a lot of, full circle moments as well, realizing like, oh, I was already doing this intuitively. Like I was already doing this, Arabic thing intuitively before, because it was, already in my subconscious. And then like other full circle moments, like, realizing a lot of the folk music that we know today originates like really essentially from Africa. The banjo that we use today, that we associate with country music, a long time ago was, a traditional African instrument that parts of Egypt still use. And so leaning into that as well, and leaning into, folk music's roots in Africa and what crossover that has with, my Egyptian influences as well.
I think that's really fascinating. And there are, I think, two really pivotal periods for our ears to be set to the music that we're going to kind of assimilate. By the time you're 2 or 3, you've got your ear kind of set to a style. So the things we're listening to when we're very little start to come out. And I definitely noticed that when I started to sing, and people started to say I sounded like a folk singer. And I'm like, well, that might be because I was listening to music from the 70s. And then that next phase, I think, is probably our tweens, because there are, I have my rocker moments from the 80s. And so it's really interesting how those things do start to come out even when we don't anticipate it. And I know that I've written some songs that have a style that kind of follows along the pathway of some of my musical peers, even though I didn't hear them in the moment because I went to college. It was a small town. We didn't have a top 40 radio station, so I couldn't hear what was being played. And yet I write things that kind of follow that almost unspoken school of music. And so it's really interesting that you would be able then to go back and identify that, oh yeah, now I see why this is coming out in my music. And I think that that really impacts a lot of us as songwriters, that there are those influences that are intentional, and then there are those influences that we've just lived with. And it's kind of a beautiful thing because it will always lead to our flavor of that thing that has influenced us. And iteration, I think, is beautiful. I think it's a great thing to be able to build on something that we've loved and known, because that familiarity is what draws people in. And then that uniqueness keeps pushing things forward and creates something fresh.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's definitely a common experience for people to have a musical background from more than one region of the world, especially, in America, and the presence of so many people from so many different backgrounds. I mean, I grew up in Los Angeles, so I obviously had a lot of exposure to Latin music as well. And so it's really wonderful how those things can slowly seep into your mindset and the way that you make music. And for me personally, and for other people from my similar background that have maybe heard Arabic music, but maybe are, distant from it linguistically, or, it's our parents' generation or grandparents' generation. It's not, cool anymore to listen to it. I mean, I think it's cool. I listen to it. But if my music offers that sort of medium of giving people this way to connect with heritage without it feeling like, some very distant experience. Like, I want it to really hit home with people. And I think there's so many people that really do have the same kind of diaspora experience that I do.
And that is, such a beautiful way to bring that connection and bring that relevance and bring it forward. And it's just such a really cool thing. I hope that a lot of people really are connecting with that, and then can maybe be inspired, especially other artists, to bring in that uniqueness, that thing that they grew up with, wherever their history is, and celebrate it. Because the other part of that is the familiarity for those who have a different background will draw them in, and they get exposed to something really neat and something that is beautiful and outside of their experience. And it's just a great way to continue to make these neighbors and connections. So I really, really love that.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's the other thing too, is I really don't want my audience to be limited to diaspora people from the Middle East or from the Arab world. I think it's something that a lot of people can connect with. And even, on this album, all my friends who we worked on it together, we're really all from different backgrounds as well. And we're able to all connect on, Arabic music, or this kind of Arabesque folk sound that we were all making together, because it's really just a matter of making music that feels important, that feels salient to you. I think I've used this word before, but responsibility. I think after studying the history of my culture and really wanting to do justice to it, and bring it forward, propel it forward, bring, things that are thought of as like old or traditional or, backwards. I wanted to bring these things into 2026 and be like, this type of music is here to stay. It's here to be innovated and changed in as many ways as possible. And I really want it to become a sound. I don't know. I would love to see like what other people do with it, what other musicians think and what they jam on it too.
That's amazing. And it's got to be fascinating to be sort of a trailblazer in something that is ancient.
Totally.
I think it's just beautiful.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of growing. I think there's more representation. There's more Middle Eastern representation in the music industry. A lot of people are showing more interest in it, especially people from the West are showing more interest in it. And I think having that not necessarily from the pop sphere, but from the more mellow indie singer-songwriter sphere of folk music. And I think also going back to your roots in that way, in that music from the region that I'm from is very much community based. It's very much improvisational and raw and emotional. And I think it fits super well in the context of folk music that we know of in the West, of storytelling and really being very emotional and sitting around with your friends at a campfire and sharing what's in your heart. And I think that's something that all music, I think, can agree upon in that aspect. But specifically like Arabic music and Western folk music as we know it today really connect on that feature. And I really wanted to lean into that as well.
And that's an excellent observation because that does feel like just such a beautiful marriage, essentially, of where those could intersect very, very well. And it reminds me about how when the concept of world music started to at least just be a term, more than anything, it had to do with instrumentation. And so you could just say, well, I used this cajon, and so it's world music now, or I used this or that or the other thing. And there's clearly just so much more depth to that. And I think the thing that we don't explore a lot in Western music, obviously, has been the different tonalities. And that's broadly across the world because we are so very specifically tied into equal temperament and and what we've been listening to mainly for the last probably 400 years. And so I think that's where we just don't really have a lot of understanding, and yet we're missing this opportunity because of these things that can really live together very well and then enhance each other. So this is just very fascinating to me.
Yeah, this concept of world music is something I have a lot of opinions about it. It's very interesting. It definitely feels like this kind of West and the rest vibe where, anything that's kind of slightly different, we can all put it in one category. Of course, I think we all make world music. We're all people of the world, we all make, music on the same planet. But I think understanding where exactly those cultural elements are coming from and understanding their importance, I think is something that I hold in very high importance. Being like, this musician is using the oud because it's this instrument that he always wanted to play since he was a little kid, because it represents his culture and his history and his story. I think that is really what I want to come across with this, instead of like, oh, this, artist is using these like Arabic sounds because it sounds kind of exotic, there's a completely different reading of both of those things. And, I think regarding what you said about, our ears being so accustomed to like equal temperament, that's a reality, but it's something that could change, and if it's something that my music helps people, get across this hurdle of like, oh, wow, this is a new piece of music that I've not heard before. And then have them start listening to my influences as well and be like, okay, here, go to the mother source and find out really like what the wonders of this music can offer. I'd love that as well. But yeah, I think just really being mindful about like where the localized traditions are coming from and really paying respect to those traditions, instead of being like, it's cool. I think it's cool when people bring in cultural elements. It's super cool. I just think we should always like be very mindful about like how we frame that in our consumption of that media. It's a lot of identity politics as well, in that like I don't want the reason that somebody listens to my music is because it's different. Like I want them to like actually like the music and then be like, oh, and it also sounds a little bit different and that's really cool. Or like I want people to like the difference. I don't want them to like it just because it's different.
Yeah, that's such a great insight and thoughtfulness. And it's so ideal too. We can bring them in with, they love this sound. And then because they do connect with it, they'll go further and they'll recognize so much more about what's happening in this music. And that's everywhere from the lyric to who you are. And I think that's just a really great thing that every artist should kind of write from that pathway of make great music and then make that great music something really particular and special, and it will just enhance all of our experiences.
Totally.
We'll be back with more after this break.
Do you cringe when someone asks for your website? The problem usually isn't the design, it's that your message isn't clear. Attitude Creativity helps indie artists and creatives get crystal clear on their brand story and can build a website around it that actually grows your audience. I'm Becky Boyland, Story Brand Certified Guide, fellow artist, and your secret weapon to finally sounding like yourself online. Book a free discovery call at attitudecreativity.com. Hey, I'd like to share with you something really special I'm working on. I bet you've been sitting on songs, maybe for years. You know how to write, but finishing them, that part feels out of reach. I get it. I've been there. And I built She Produces Music because I believe women don't need to wait for someone else to bring their music to life. It's a coaching program for female songwriters who are ready to learn music production in Ableton Live and finally hear what their songs are actually supposed to sound like. Find out if it's right for you at sheproducesmusic.com. Now, you've touched on the really great jam process of writing and how you worked on this project. Are there any other things you want to talk about with this particular album and that you want to share?
Yeah. So I think touching on that Diaspora experience that I was mentioning before, the album, I decided to call it The Carpet Maker. I wrote this title track, this song called The Carpet Maker, briefly after my first trip to Egypt. And I was kind of like imagining what life would be like had my family stayed there, and had we, what would I be up to? What would I be doing? And, I realized there's this like naive spirit that comes with imagining what your life would be like on the other side. And so the song is it's very nostalgic and it's very naive, and it talks about an alternative reality where maybe I wander through the desert or weave carpets, and maybe that's my trade, and maybe that's what I do with my life, and maybe I just play music and look at the stars. And it's a slightly exotifying, I think, picture of what that life would actually be like. But I think it's something that we all face in the diaspora, of like, we only really can access our homeland through our parents' memories, their stories, pictures, FaceTiming people that are at home. And also the media, we grew up watching Aladdin, we grew up watching 1001 Nights cartoons and seeing this very exotified picture of the East and how we see our own homelands. And so I think it's important to really touch on that naive thing that I wrote when I first came back, thinking that my life would be, wandering through the desert and weaving baskets and all of that good stuff. And I think the progression of the album was kind of learning what the homeland was really about. And like I said, gaining that responsibility to represent the homeland in a proper way, in its authentic way. And I think if there's anything that I would describe the album as, it's like this quest of not only self-discovery, but this quest for like authenticity, how to really be truly who I am as a multicultural individual, how to properly represent my background through sound. And I think it's a really culminating experience for me as an artist to come out with this project, and I'm just really eager to record more music and start working on another album. It's like I said, a lot of experimentation, but a lot of experimentation that I think was very high yielding in the end.
I love that. And I'm picturing especially as you're talking about the title track, it's the closest I think that some people can get is maybe studying their family tree and then getting to see some documents that point out what someone's experience was. And it's easy then to try to put yourself in that experience. But the added layer to that is your parents' experience and those that you can literally get that information directly from of a very different growing up. And it's just such a really powerful thing to explore. And I think that the further that we get away from that, obviously, the more we forget that they had to live a very different way. And it was sometimes a lot harder than we think. And in other ways, the things that we might think would be very, very difficult could have made for a beautiful, simple life. And it's just beneficial for all of us in our current world and our current experiences to think about how vastly different this world is than even a generation or two prior. Things have changed at such a fast pace that maybe one of the touch points that's so powerful for us is something like music. And that's why it is not optional. It's just such an important part of human existence because this is a great way that we can keep ourselves grounded and connected.
Totally, totally. I think, yeah, accessing my parents' and grandparents' stories is very interesting too. And also like what as a child you gain from them versus what I gain from them now as an adult. And now I feel like with what I know now about history, about what I've studied, I take it in such a completely different way. I put it in context. And I can see a lot more now than when I was, first writing that title track. And I think having it in there at the very beginning of the album also, really emphasizes the growth there. By the end of the song, you really feel this sense of responsibility and this sense of really understanding and desire to understand your entire, family and your entire history.
Yeah, and I like how you kind of describe this whole process of it being this quest. And so I imagine throughout the entire album, even beyond within the context of one song, you have this full journey. And I think that's going to really have an impact. And I hope that people then, sometimes people are starting to go back and recognize that there's value in listening to a whole album as opposed to a series of singles. And so it's really, really great that that is what you've offered, what you're putting together. And especially with the depth of the kind of journey that you've been on to do this, that is so wonderful to have a complete body of work around that and then to continue to do that in the future.
Thank you. I've been writing more too since I finished recording this album. And I'm just very eager to get back into the studio. And, it's cool because it's like now that I know that this sound is possible, we can really push the limits of it. We can really take it to new levels, I think, at this point. Now it's not just like a trial album. It's the sound.
That's awesome. Now, as you continue in this journey, what are some of the challenges or obstacles that you might be running into?
Good question. In the kind of consumer market that we live in these days, I really want to present a story. And sometimes it's very hard to, simplify that story to, a 15-second short form content video. And I think it's something a lot of artists struggle with for sure. But yeah, no, sometimes it does feel a little bit like I'm identity plugging, like I'm, just trying to get views because I'm somebody who makes a cultural music and is coming from a different background that maybe, your average TikTok viewer would be like, oh, this is cool. I'm going to click like and save. But, that, like I said before, that's not the reason why I want people to follow my music. So it's been an interesting time navigating that scene of like really how to market and like how to reach the correct audiences. But, I think word of mouth is so underrated in 2026. I really love word of mouth, especially living in New York. It's a really wonderful opportunity to just meet people on the street and, I'll be holding my guitar, I'll be carrying my oud in public. People are like, what is that instrument? Like, what is that weird instrument that you have? And so it's cool. I think it's community here in New York has been the way that I've found a lot of great new listeners for my music, a lot of great new audiences and great friends, obviously, great fellow artists. But yeah, tackling the digital marketing scene has been a bit of a challenge.
It's totally true, because I know there are times when I'm trying to figure out what to clip out of my song, and I'm like, but wait, you got to hear the bridge. It's really good. But I can't just post the bridge. But I think the other misconception that we all have is that people don't have an attention span, and that's not true. They just don't have tolerance for something that doesn't grab the attention. But once you do, you can keep them for minutes, hours, who knows how long, and the deep dives as well. But of course, now what I've taken away from that too is that if I want people to ask me questions, I should have my guitar out of its case and just walk around with it on strapped on and get those conversations going. Obviously, I jest, but those are so many great insights, because building that in-person community and starting to get the word out and get the story out, I think that we're developing less and less tolerance for the digital that's fed to us, and are having more interest in meaning and kind of going back to the way things were, which obviously isn't a thing, but reclaiming the values of community and then trying to translate that across all of our touch points, including digital. And it gives me hope that that's something that we're seeing more and more of, because I think we're all hungry for that. And it's going to get better.
Totally. I think my generation especially, we really want to connect. We are just too scared to say so. I think we're all very lonely, and I think we're all very, trapped in our screens, and everybody's sick of it, but I don't think anybody has really been expressing it. And so, giving people an opportunity to connect, especially in the types of shows that we've been playing, these kind of house shows, apartment shows. Now that it's summer, almost summer, I'm very excited to be playing like at the park and doing more outdoor concerts and just bringing people together, especially the crossover between music and other arts and film and visual arts and poetry. I love being in spaces where it's not just musicians, but it's my great community of all sorts of artists, and we learn from each other, and it's a really great community. Especially, we're all, we have this kind of shared value. We all are eager to connect. And so I'm just eager to recruit more people into this sphere. I'm like, oh, you're looking for things to do in New York? Oh, come, I'm playing a show. We have all these artists who are going to be there. I really want everyone to make a new friend at my show. That's always my goal, especially if you're in an intimate space like somebody's apartment, that's very feasible.
I love that. And this is, I think, the second episode in a row where New York artist community is getting a lot of love because there is this collaborative and supportive spirit. And I know it exists in other communities as well. And I think that it's something that's actually in great contrast to the way that we think that much of the world feels about much of everything at all the time. The reality is there are those who want to support and encourage and love on people. And so it's just so exciting to hear you iterate that as well. And man, I wish I was closer to New York.
Yeah, I love LA. I love both coasts a lot for independent reasons, but recently playing music in New York has been a really great joy of mine.
That's exciting. So for someone who wants to be able to get their art out there, has maybe been hesitant to do that, but is realizing as they're listening that I have something unique, I have something special, or I have something in my heritage that I might want to incorporate, what would be your encouragement to them to get started and maybe hit the ground running?
Totally. Going off of what I said before about, bridging multiple different types of art, it's super important that if you're making music, that you're not just absorbing music, that you're absorbing movies and TV shows and books, and books were huge for me personally, reading novels and reading literary fiction novels. And, that's been a huge inspiration to like the kinds of prose that I write that end up turning into songs. So just always, having a grasp on other art forms besides music. And then even within music, it's important not to just listen to the type of music that you want to make, but just, keep your mind open to all different types of music. And if you have something, if you feel like you have a vision for something, you shouldn't like give it up. I faced a lot of, this is not working. This sound doesn't work. It's, orientalizing. It's like I had all these different challenges with this sound, but, sticking it out until we found something that really felt true and genuine was so worth it. And so definitely, if you have a vision, seek out your vision till the end. I think it'll be worth it.
I'm wondering if there are certain styles or genres or other historical points that you might have listened to that were outside of this, that were kind of inspiring to you, that you think that people should listen to and check out just to expand their ears and their experience and what they might have been exposed to.
Yeah, I think speaking of neighbors, I did a really wonderful class at Columbia called Leaving the Ottoman Empire. And it was a class about different communities who immigrated to the United States from the former Ottoman Empire. And in that class, I went down a really amazing rabbit hole on these Armenian oud players who came and brought their ouds to New York City, among other places, but especially New York City, and created this really amazing music scene along with Greeks and other immigrants. But, these specific Armenian oud players, I specifically recommend Ara Dinkyan. He's an incredible oud player, and he plays differently. Like his style of playing the oud is different from mine. It's a different tradition, obviously. But I was very inspired by people like him who really took this multicultural American and Armenian identity and really turned it into something that like the Armenian diaspora and people back in Armenia like still can really connect with. And so I was really inspired by Armenian musicians a lot when I was also in that immersion phase. And so definitely recommend that as well.
That's wonderful. How can people keep up with what you're doing and find the album and really just kind of get into your online world?
Great. Yeah. So everything will be, my home base is my website, michaelisaak.us, and Isaac is spelled Isaak. I also have Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, and my handles are all Michael Isaak Music. And definitely check out my Spotify or wherever you like to stream your music from. I also have a Bandcamp, and that's a way for people to directly support the artists that they like and directly buy music from the artists. So that's a great opportunity if you'd like to support.
Awesome. And that is another way that you can also pay the artist more than a fraction of a penny for each listen. So highly recommend that as well. This has been just such a wonderful conversation. Is there anything else that you want to share that we didn't touch upon yet?
My first single off the album, Hold Your Keys, came out March 6th. I'm really excited about that one. And the album will be out on May 15th.
Well, thank you so much for being here and talking about really what is just such a very important topic about this combination of beautiful cultures and being mindful of our heritage and how we can also bridge that to other people, bridge to the past, but bridge to others so they can have that same experience. And all the best on your new album.
Thank you so much, Becky. I had an awesome time talking to you today.
What a fascinating conversation with Michael. What I want to highlight for you, because this isn't just a beautiful story, it's an instructive one, is that Michael had a vision. He had heritage, instinct, and real musical chops, but for a while he was trying to force his identity into music, rather than letting it surface. He kept asking, how do I sound Arabic? When the better question, the one that unlocked everything, was simply, who am I? And what does this actually sound like? That's a story brand principle at its core. You can't guide an audience somewhere you haven't been yourself. Michael had to live the story before he could tell it. He immersed himself in language and history in literal jam sessions until the music stopped being about distinction. It started being about truth, and that's when the album became possible. Here's the actionable takeaway for you, wherever you are in your creative journey. Your differentiator is not a strategy. It's an excavation. You don't construct it, you uncover it. If you've been sitting on a sound, a story, a part of your background that you've been nervous to bring forward because you're not sure it fits, Michael's journey is your permission slip. Stop waiting to feel ready. Start digging. And in a moment, I want you to hear what all of that excavation sounds like. Hold Your Keys is the lead single from The Carpet Maker, out May 15th. It's inspired by Michael's father's stories of war and displacement and the symbol that many in diaspora communities carry close. A key, worn around the neck, representing the hope that one day they'll go home. But first, if this episode moved you, and I think it may have, the best thing you can do is subscribe so you never miss a conversation like this one. And if you have a moment, leave a review. It genuinely helps Second Verse reach more artists who need to hear stories like Michael's. You can find Michael at michaelisaak.us, that's ISAAK, and on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Michael Isaak Music. Support him directly on Bandcamp, where your dollars actually reach the artist. And until next time, keep writing your second verse. And now, here's Michael Isaak with Hold Your Keys.